Thoughts on Theology, and we're your hosts, Vicar Andrew and Pastor Martin, and we are continuing, almost done, with the book called To Believe. And so we've looked at a lot of different, who is God, and what about his church even, but what does the Christian do living in this broken world? What's our goal? What's our purpose? What is the Christian's role in society?
Yeah, great question. I think it should be informed by everything that we've talked about the last 13 chapters. And then we finally get to, okay, now what? How do I live this out? I have all this theory. I have all this understanding of my place in this universe according to God's good creation. And now how do I put it all together? And so I think there are some good things that we can glean from this chapter.
Yeah, and some really important doctrines for us, because it is easy to say, well, the Christian's role is to make his kingdom here, and it's like, well, okay, that's going to be more God's job than your job, but there is certainly a role of where we are his missionaries, right, his ambassadors in this world. But the way that we kind of see our Lutheran theology, we see it in two different kingdoms in which God is king of both.
Yeah.
Right? There's the what we'll call the right hand kingdom and the left hand kingdom.
Which I had never heard that terminology before. I just saw it as maybe like church and state, basically. The kingdom of the right being that of the church and the kingdom of the left being that of the state, for lack of better terms there. But it kind of works. But yeah, I thought that was interesting that that's where he starts, that no matter where you are in society or more in the Christian realm and church, that God is the kingdom of both kingdoms, no matter where you are. And I thought that was a very good reminder that he's the king of all creation.
Right. So let's talk first about the right hand kingdom then. That of the church, and we call that the right hand kingdom because that's his proper work is working in and through his people. So in the church. So we talk about his proper work being that of forgiving sin and of teaching about salvation. Like that's the church's job. Right, is to present and to proclaim the grace of Christ for all people.
For sure, yeah.
But if we only try to exist in this right-hand kingdom, then what we end up doing is something like the old monastery system where you are removing yourself from society, you're removing yourself from the world, and that actually goes against the mission of God.
Yep.
We are called to be in this world.
Yep. We are to be salt in the world. We are to give the world its flavor. We are to be a light on the hill, and you can only do that when you're actually on the hill. You're in the middle of everything, providing that light.
Yeah. Well, it's hard to make disciples if only you're ever surrounded by already existing disciples.
Yep.
You have to be in the world as his ambassadors, as his hands and feet. So you're supposed to be the way the scripture says it, in the world but not of the world, right?
Exactly.
So we can't just be isolated into our little church cluster and say, okay, we're okay, and no one cares about anyone else. Yep. No. We also have to be part of this left-hand kingdom. And that's where we would say it's certainly our government. It's also certainly just our society, our jobs, our families. These are all part of that left-hand kingdom where, not to say that grace doesn't exist there, but where justice is probably more so lived out. I don't know if that's a right way of saying it.
Yeah, sorry, explain that a little bit more.
Well, in the church, we often have this thing where we don't get what we deserve. Right? We get grace.
Get the mercy.
We have mercy. Yeah. And mercy is kind of the staple then of the church's job. But can you imagine if mercy was the staple of the left-hand kingdom where, you didn't create a safe road? Well, it's mercy for you, even though many people died because of your accident. No, that would be unjust. right? You actually need justice in that realm. You need accountability in that realm. You need law and order in that realm. And again, that's not to say that there's not law and order in the church.
There's also a lot of justice in the church, but justice for us. But yeah, that's interesting. I never really thought about that. But yeah, the chapter continues talking about how we live in both kingdoms.
Yeah.
Right? We live with our vocations is kind of the next thing. But before we get to that, we exist both in the right hand and the left hand kingdom. And we live our lives very similarly. We just experience what you're talking about, the mercy, a lot more in that right hand kingdom than we might in the left hand kingdom. And we see a lot more of the brokenness of the world in that left-hand kingdom and just the self-idolatry, let's say it that way, in that left-hand kingdom. Hopefully we don't see a lot of that in the right-hand kingdom. But then it does get to the idea of the vocation. And there's a lot to talk about when it talks about vocation, but what does vocation even mean? It starts there.
Well, I mean, it comes from the Latin. The idea is it's a calling, vocal. Someone has called out to us, and that someone being God. You have been called, you have received this vocation, this calling to be in this work or in this relationship or in this context. So, Andrew, for you have been called to be a husband and a father. You've been called into this concept of ministry, not called in the sense of, called to be a pastor yet.
Sure. Yeah.
But that you've received that internal call. It's like, hey, God said, you should go and be a pastor, even though you repeatedly said, no.
Said no a couple times.
Yeah, but that calling, that vocation is yours. You're also, for some time, you had the vocation of working at Cerner. It was a job, yes, but more than that, it was an opportunity to love your neighbor in that realm, in that context. So that's one of the biggest things that we actually received from the Reformation was this renewal of the importance of vocation. Because back then, what had happened was, if you loved God, then you had to be a pastor. If you loved God, you needed to be a monk or a nun.
Interesting.
Or, you couldn't do anything else because that was really God-pleasing stuff. And everything else was just for you. And Luther fought heavy against that, saying, going as far as to say, those who are, the person who is excellent at sweeping.
Yeah, it has it in the box here. I love that little vignette. Yeah, the serving girl who sweeps the floor and milks the cow worship the God in a beautiful way. And a student who listens to his teacher in faith should know that he is doing a precious thing. And yeah, I didn't realize that was kind of something that Luther fought for. I think that's really awesome.
Absolutely. It was the holier act. And this is weird. Luther says it is a holier act to change your child's diaper than it is to pray as a monk. They're like, whoa! You just said changing a diaper is better than prayer.
Yeah.
And he's saying like one of these is loving your neighbor in a very practical way. Not to say that you shouldn't pray.
Yeah.
But if you just pray and you refuse then to love your neighbor in a practical way, then you're not actually living out your faith.
Yeah.
And so you need to have that. That's why Jesus has the command. When he's asked, what's the greatest commandment, singular, he says, well, the first is love the Lord your God.
Yeah.
The second is love your neighbor. And this is the best commandment.
Yeah, you can't separate one without the other. They are the commandment.
Yes,
yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's how we got this concept of vocation, that you are a servant of God, whether or not you are ordained, or whether you are a shoemaker, or whether you are a businessman, or a stay-at-home mom, or whatever.
And I love what you talked about, the different vocations in your family, at your job, at whatever role you're doing. You have a vocation in that. You have a calling to love the neighbor, to love the person around you, and you can do that. You can serve them well in whatever role that is. But we as people wear a lot of different hats. Like your family of origin. When you go back, that is a vocation, but you live it a little bit differently than with Leah and the kids.
Yeah.
And so that looks differently. And then if you are that shoemaker, or you're a lawyer, you're a doctor, that vocation looks a little different than you are with the kids, but it's all a calling of God. You are always supposed to live out this Christian life in that kingdom, in that vocation. And so I think that's a good reminder for us that no matter what role you're at currently, do it to the glory of God.
Absolutely. And that is the bulk of the chapter, is talking about this vocation. First he talks a lot about the vocation of job. We shouldn't see our occupations as just a means by which to make money. That's true, but it's a means for you to love your neighbor, whether it be your family and providing for your family, whether that's developing the relationships with your coworkers so that you can be a witness to them, whether it's just providing a meaningful service to society in which
you're
you
a
live.
nurse and you're taking care of someone. Like, that is a meaningful service. You can serve people there. I think about, one of my good friends just got a new job, and he talks about how he works from home, and he's basically just trying to cash the check so that he can do other things with his day. And I'm like, that's not the right attitude to have in this role, in this job. If it's just for the money, if it's just for the check, then that's really the wrong motivation for this. And so that's what the chapter is talking against.
Right. Well, and we can. That's absolutely true. I like to try to shift it from the negative to the positive, because I don't want it to come across as we're wagging fingers, like, you better see your job as something important. No.
Right.
Instead, open your eyes to see more than the paycheck. But to see the brother or the sister, the neighbor or whoever that you are blessing by going to that 9 to 5. It can be a drag at times, and it can be I'm not happy in this. Okay, but are you serving your neighbor here?
At Cerner, I actually really appreciated the way we had a guy that was kind of really over all the people that were new to our team. The community works, like the whole organization. He would always talk about, what's your why for being here? And it can't just be cashing a paycheck. Like, why I'm here is that I actually believe that we are making critical access hospitals better, and so he talked about how, like, find your why. And so I had that for however long I was there. Like, I actually thought, man, I can do a really good job. I can make this hospital better. I can make them more efficient. They can see more patients. Oh my gosh, they can actually get in a couple more people to be like, oh, hey, you need care. And so that was really important for me during that vocation to understand that, man, I'm spending an extra 3 hours at home on my computer, but there's a reason for this, because in 2 weeks it's going to make whatever a lot easier for me and this hospital better. And so, I appreciated that.
Yeah, I have a friend who's a car salesman, and that's exactly the same thing. So many of those, he has all kinds of stories about that particular occupation.
That vocation is a unique calling.
It is, but he can tell the folks that are there for the money and those who are there to bless a person or a family with you. And that was always such a blessing for him to say, okay, my job is not to get one more car sold. My job is to connect this family with this thing that is going to be in their lives for the next 3 to 20 years.
A long time. Yeah.
So that's when you see it that way, it changes your motivation, and you start to actually practice those words of Ephesians that says, do whatever it is you're doing, do it all to the glory of God, or work as if you're working for God, because that's exactly what we're doing.
Yeah, 100%. I know Tara and I have had this conversation a lot, like in her role, just like, how can she do this? And so I think it's a worthwhile endeavor for all of us in whatever occupation we're doing to find that why, to find that calling to serve others and to glory God, to the glory of God. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, so there's this next part after vocation. We talked about the job, and we can talk about the family a little bit too. Like, you have a vocation as father and husband, as son, and those roles are equally important, if not more important, than just the occupation.
Sure.
In fact, most of the time, your occupation is subservient to the real role of providing for the family.
100%, yeah.
But it's important that everyone knows that we all have a calling. We all have a role, a place in this society because God's placed us just so. After vocation, then, he shifts a little bit to the government.
Yeah. Now, awkward shift in your seat.
What in the world is the government's role in society, and what's our role in helping / serving / submitting to this government?
In any society, once you have all these different connective relationships, all these webs of people coming together, well, how do you govern them? How do you have laws to dictate what is good, what is bad, to punish what isn't really good? So let's maybe help people see the better. And so, the government is there, whether that be the local government, whether that be the state government, whether that be the national government, whatever it may be, it is put in place. And there is a lot of scripture that talks about the government is put in place for a reason, that all authority is God ordained. And
it's I can't remember, I think it was Thomas Jefferson talked about it as a social contract, where everyone has all the freedoms, but you give up some of those freedoms for the sake of the whole. And so, do you have the freedom and the right to run around the the street completely naked? I guess you can.
Could, yeah.
But we voluntarily give up that right and say, okay, I'm no longer free to do that because I don't want to see that from anyone else. And so you give up some rights so that the whole of society can operate well together. And that's, in some ways, just the way government works. Now, it's interesting. You talk about Scripture talking about the role of government, and I mean, Romans 13 is very, very clear here that we are called to submit to whatever authority and whatever government is over us as Christians. And that sparks a huge debate and some big questions. Like, whoa.
So many times in history, well, this hasn't happened that way. Well, what about them? Well, if they submitted, that it would have.
Yeah, and eventually it always comes back to the Holocaust, right? It always comes back to Hitler. And, and that's a prime example of a terrible government. And what is the Christian's role in it, right? And we have even famous Lutherans like Bonhoeffer, who fought against that government. And say what you will, I mean, there's good and there's bad to kind of what he does in that. But what Paul says in Scripture is, as long as it is up to you, you abide by whatever government rules you can do. And keep in mind, he's writing this under Emperor Nero.
Yes.
Who routinely
the Roman,
he would routinely light Christians to light the streets of Rome. I mean, tie them up to poles, light them on fire, and then walk around Rome. I mean, hated the Christian faith and heavily persecuted it.
And this is the government that he's saying you need to submit to this.
Yeah, right. And don't live outside of the rules that they are giving you. But we also have in the book of Acts a very clear exemption from that, where the apostles are told, commanded even by the Sanhedrin, Jewish government, do not proclaim Jesus, and they say, sorry, can't do that. So as long as the command or the dictate of the government is in line with Scripture, then obey it. But if it directly contradicts what God has directly told us to do, then you are required then to not obey that thing.
Use your Christian freedom in such a way.
So take, for example, we'll take a silly example like speed limits. Okay. Annoying to have some of those bigger speed limits out there, or the ones that limit you. You're like, I just want to go faster.
The 30 mile an hour, and it feels like it should be 50. Sure. Yeah.
And you know it's just a speed trap, and it's like you can think of all the ways that this is unjust, and yet there's nothing in Scripture that says
You
that
have
this
to
is
follow.
this is a contrary to the will of God in your life. No, this is not. It's something you don't want to do. Something you don't think is fair, but you do that thing. However, if for whatever reason that government said you need to find every a little scriptural every boy under 2 years old and kill them,
Right. Okay.
like happened in Egypt, like happened again in Jerusalem, in Bethlehem, that does go directly against God's command.
Yep.
And so you have to say no. And that's more or less the way that government works as a Christian. So, any thoughts on that?
Yeah. No. It's tricky, potentially, as we look at the world. As we look at what's happening in our nation, there could be some definite questions about, well, do I follow this government that is potentially going down a road that I don't believe that it should be going down as a Christian? So what does that look like? And I think for the years to come, I think that this question is going to be even more evident and more prominent in the right-hand kingdom. Of how do we live in this left-hand kingdom that might be going a different way. And so I think this is going to be something that we are going to have to struggle with. And we're going to have to actually really ask ourselves, because we've been in, honestly, we've been in a time when both kingdoms seem to have been working hand in hand easier, more evidently. And I think that might be changing. And
I
so
would imagine, yes, it is, certainly.
And
now,
so
that actually brings up a good point, and that is, as Christians, we know, first of all, we know where our hope is found. It's in Jesus Christ, not in however, the government in which we exist, in which we live, is good or bad. But as Americans, we have a great blessing. We don't have a king or a dictator. Instead, we have an electable, representation. That's representative government. And that means we have a voice, we have a vote, we can choose who is in I suppose power. Human power at least. And and so as good Christians, use that to direct the government in the way that you think is most loving towards your neighbor and most glorifying towards our God. We don't wring our hands when things don't go that way. We don't worry and say, "Oh, this is the end." And okay, at worst, this might be the end of America, but it's not the end of God's kingdom. It's not the end of His church. So we keep that kind of we keep that in mind. But it also does drive us to action. To say, "Hey,
we should do something."
We might look at this government right now and say, "Hey, there are better ways for us to love our neighbor. There are better ways for us to care for the people and the things that He's given to us. Ways that we can prepare for our future generations. Instead of handing them however much debt, well, we can give them something better than that. We can love our neighbor now and later in a better way. Okay, drive for that. Promote that. That's great. But don't think. And it's so easy for us to say, so I'm going to put my hope in that instead of in that right-hand kingdom truth that we are saved by grace and that nothing's going to strip us of that.
That's such a good distinction, that last little bit right there. That our hope is not found in the government, no matter what's happening there. Our hope is found in Jesus. That is where we put our hope and faith. But we still act. We still have a part to play in this left-hand kingdom. We still have a part to play in all of our vocations. It's not an excuse to not act or just like, well, God's got it or God's going to do it. And that is true, but, we are called to act. We are called to use our vocation in a way that brings Him glory, to bring about His kingdom as it is on earth.
Yep. Well said. And so that's the Christian's role in society. Your vocation, and even your submission to our leaders and authorities. So, thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next time.